Welcome back to Side Quest, episode 26, Final Fantasy VII, episode 14. And back with me is my esteemed colleague, Mr. Wes Schantz. Welcome back.
Hey, it's good to be back. I'm looking forward to this one. This is one we've been looking forward to since we started, I feel like.
Oh, man. Well, it does have what I think is the iconic moment of this game, certainly this disc, and also sets up, I think, sort of the to use gamer terminology, ultimate level tragedy that we will see in the future. I guess I won't give too much away now, but I do want to talk a little bit about what the setup can be during that moment. And the moment you're referring to is, of course, the moment in the Golden Saucer when you go on the date, and even more specifically, probably the moment when you're on the tram and the fireworks are going off. Now, a firework is a symbol for what a human being living with joy can be, and so it's a great symbol. And you know, you're just having this real moment. And if what you do in a video game is take the frame of reference of the protagonist, and Cloud is the protagonist, then it's sort of like representing falling in love.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're like a 14-year-old who aspires to be, you know, a cool person like Cloud who can wield a sword, so I guess is a metaphor for a thinking person who can work in the world and can earn the love of someone beautiful, well, that's a very powerful moment. And what comes just a little bit later, too, will be made all the more powerful because of the sort of connection or the bonding one might make to the narrative and to the characters within the narrative by sharing that emotion. Go on.
The date is also the moment when you kind of realize something about yourself too, because there's a few different possibilities for who is going to come into your room and sort of invite you onto this tram and the fireworks that you're going to be with. And so it's kind of a revelation of the sort of person that you have been in the course of the game so far. Either you're going to go with Eris, or you're going to go with Tifa, or even, I've never had this happen, but apparently you can go with Barrett also. So if you play your cards right.
I've heard the same. Yeah, well, so that just brings up a couple things that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about how Red 13, as number 13, could be one of the black-caped men who is doomed to go crazy, and in what way that relates to Cloud and the work we read by Professor Gast in Gast's Library in the Shinra Mansion, or was it in the Shinra Building? Excuse me, the Shinra Building, yes. No, but we did, I think, get that information from the basement that Sephiroth did his reading in of the Shinra Mansion. Yeah, just to make a long point long. But I also wanted to consider... well, besides Cait Sith and the importance of gatherings, it's been so long since we've done this, or we never get to do this anymore, which I thought was so powerful, like the fire moment, and what that means. But, well, what is it that... so you went with Tifa, sorry.
Yeah.
And I went with Ares. And the specific information I got from mine was, she was searching for me. She was telling me that I was just like Zack, but that there was something different. We looked alike. We gestured alike. We sort of talked alike, but I'm different. She says, I'm searching for you, Cloud. And he says, but I'm right here. And then she says, yeah, but I'm searching for ... ellipsis, you. And so some indication that there's some falsity to him, that there's he's putting on a front, but there is something beneath that front that we have yet to see. And so that's sort of what comes out in that relationship. And then she sort of hints at wanting to go steady with him, and very sadly sort of suggests that next time they should come here and they should spend more time together, which is such a sweet image.
Yeah, that's really interesting because Tifa's is a little different. She she suggests that she's sort of playing it cool the whole time, and she refers to them as old friends and talks about how it's sort of difficult to be old friends, and then she sort of trails off. A lot of hers is sort of being shy and being coy and not quite coming to the point. She comes into your room and invites you out, but then on the tram, she says that she's going to go ahead and say something, and then there's the ... and then she never says it. But one other thing that I found really interesting about it was that she says that she thinks it would have been easy for Eris. And so, like you're saying, in Eris's case, she goes ahead and says that she wants to go out with you. She wants to be a serious relationship or something like that. And for Tifa, it's on the one hand much harder, but on the other hand, she can sort of envision that it could be easier if only she were more like Eris. And so it seems like this other character is very much on her mind, as no doubt it's on the player's mind too. And I guess it's sort of an open question whether it's on Cloud's mind. You're sort of invited to respond with him however you choose. And the main place that's dramatized is in the play, where you get to play the knight saving the damsel in distress from the evil Dragon King, right? And so you have choices up to this point in the game that determine who you're going to be on the date with, and then even within the date, you have choices about what you're going to do, how you're going to act, whether you want to play dumb, play coy, or whether you want to play the role, sort of literally within the play of the hero. And it's really obvious which one's which. I went ahead and tried to, do the play correctly. But I think there's some funny dialogue, I'm sure, if you mess up, and do the wrong thing. And then, if you do everything during the play, then Cloud and his paramour, whoever she is or he is, I think he kisses her, at least her hand.
Yes.
You have the option to kiss. And then everyone sort of just like dances off stage because the power of true love has vanquished the evil Dragon King. It's comical in a way, but it's also sort of like, especially when you know the full story of it, there's something very, very moving about it.
Does Tifa, so there's something very special about how Ares does this. And so Tifa is right to compare herself to Ares as if Ares is sort of a feminine ideal, like a figure of the anima, as the Jungians would say, also conflated with the sort of idea of the Great Mother, right? Because she is an ancient and thus partakes of ancient maternal powers, like being able to listen to the earth, which we talked about as a feminine symbol in our night school lectures. And so she is this sort of ideal super figure, right? She's like a superhero, sort of, or a famous person. She has a sheen on her. She's also a gardener, and she can make things grow in place. She's literally magical, and comes from a race that makes her totally unique, and so she's ultimately special, and also happens to be very feminine and kind and wonderful at that. And so Tifa, she just doesn't quite fit the mold. She's, like a tomboy. She's athletic. She's a fighter. She fights with her fists. And it's funny that she seems to have acquired this ability to fight with her fists precisely because she's so shy, right? So that she can stand up for herself and have the courage to sort of go after what she wants. And yet still, for all her martial arts training, she does ask Cloud out in your case, but she doesn't quite get to the punch or lay it out in the way that she wants to, in the most effective, maybe most straightforward way. And so that does make me wonder to what extent, because we brought this question up much earlier in the podcast, Ares is sort of a figure of the ideal feminine or the idealized feminine, and Tifa is more like a real person. And to what it's, and I also just wonder, just to add another caveat, whether that's sort of like a traditional idea of the feminine as opposed to, say, a more contemporary or developing ideal within the modern world, in the modern sort of workspace.
Yeah, because Tifa has been a friend of Cloud's since they were, I guess, growing up, which, as she says, makes it more difficult in a way to then transition to a more romantic relationship. And that, seems just to be the case, right? If you sort of know the kind of story that you're in, and then you're suddenly trying to change the narrative and change your role within that story, then there's a kind of obstacle there to get over. And ultimately she does recur, in her mind at least, to Eris as a kind of ideal for what she's trying to be. And perhaps Cloud is thinking about that, or perhaps Cloud is totally oblivious. It's sort of like that's up to the player to think about, because we don't really see much of what Cloud is actually thinking. It's sort of the player's decisions that have led up to this point. And I'm really curious too about the way that it's not just a binary, because you can go on the date with Eris, you can go on the date with Tifa, but you can also go on the date with Barrett. And I guess maybe in some of the new versions, it sounds like Yuffie also is an option. I don't remember that from the PS1 days, but I guess there's like a re-release of the game where you can go on the date with Yuffie too. And it's kind of interesting that he is kind of maternal in a lot of ways, because he's taking care of his best friend's daughter this whole time. He's cared for her and looked out for her. He's very closely associated with the Earth, right? As trying to save the energy of materia and Mako from Shinra, who are extracting it. He's also, physically very sort of like stout and stocky and, motherly in that regard too. Like he's got this body type which envelops you, rather than being classically, I guess, like chiseled and masculine. He's like kind of a big teddy bear. So yeah, I like that there's that option, which maybe the player has to sort of go out of their way to accomplish, but that's there to make it, not simply a love triangle, but this more open-ended sort of thing. That strikes me as very modern or postmodern or whatever you want to say. So it's like you have this image for the classic storyline of the feminine archetype. You have this image of the tomboy, the girl next door, and then you have this other thing, which is a guy who's living a life that he never expected, but is just like doing his best to get by, and he's, I guess, the closest thing Cloud has to a friend at this point, and you can go watch fireworks with him too, and that's really cute. I like that.
Okay, well, and with the good and the deep and the meaningful and the moving in the positive way, we then get an immediate shock, another masterful turn, as the Aristotelian or those who read Aristotle's Poetics know is considered a major aspect of tragedy. One of our own, an odd one of our own, who we first met here, who's been hooking us up, who gets us into this ghost hotel. And I was wondering, why is it a ghost hotel, Wes? And he betrays, he totally turns on us and tells us that he works for Shinra and that he gives away the keystone that we had to sort of work hard for. So we met Dio again and had to do the battle arena, and I'd love to ask about how you did there. And but he and then he sort of blackmails us into staying on the team, so we get silence. We don't even get the ability to shun him or to fight him off. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I was thinking about the Ghost Hotel, I guess as a kind of attraction. And it's interesting that fear and jump scares and things like that are an attraction to people. It's really used pretty much only so that the characters have a place to stay while they're at Gold Saucer. And so it's kind of like the game forces you to explore Gold Saucer, especially at this point where you're chasing Cait Sith through all the different pods or whatever, those leaves on the tree. But it was the same way when you were looking for Barrett back when you thought he was the gunman who was shooting people back when you first were there. So it's like the game is determined to make you explore Gold Saucer, venture through the different areas, the different squares as they're called, right? Maybe that's a pun on the developer's name. I'm not sure. But anyway, when you do find Cait Sith and he pulls that card of blackmail, it's a weird betrayal too, because in a way he did the same thing when he first met him, right? He sort of forced himself into your company, and it just kind of reinforces, I guess, his character or its character, right? As this kind of force of strangeness, of something that's not quite rational, or doesn't have the same kind of story and follow the same kind of patterns as the rest of the crew. I did also notice that, and I found it kind of funny, that your newest team member, Sid, as you're trying to like hash out the story so far in the lobby of the Ghost Hotel, is like sleeping in the corner. He sort of nods off and is just like totally indifferent to the whole storyline. And I feel like that too is representative of a certain way of playing this game. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting too that Barrett was the one who didn't understand how the story, what the story meant, but cared mostly for what it meant for action, for what to do next, what to proceed to next. And just because he speaks with sort of a dialect, I make a connection between him and Hagrid and Harry Potter. And the fact that Hagrid is right next to the Forbidden Forest and is the gamekeeper and is the farthest removed from the citadel of the city sort of means that he's the more primitive man, or the man who, and given his large size and his half-troll heritage, I think that's a very fair characterization of him. And he's even undereducated, though not totally due to his own fault, though he was breaking the rules. But so he's like Harry in that way. But in any case, he like Barrett, it seems like they're the Aristotelian two modes of being, the practical man as opposed to the man of like thinking or speculation, as like the one who abstractly thinks, because like it's never Hagrid who just wants to sit around and think about things. He wants to go hang out with Dragon or with Buckbeak, though he does enjoy tea, though it's not very good when he makes it. And it's the same with Barrett as well. He's, like you said, of the earth. He is like the salt of the earth, and that he doesn't really care for the finer points of the story, but for just getting through it, because or how do I put it? I'm sorry, I don't mean to pause like that, but just for just playing to play. And I think you posed that question, like, or suggested that those are two ways of playing. And I do find myself sort of vacillating between those, like playing while sort of really getting into the details of the game, and then other times just kind of playing through things and scrolling through text.
Yeah. I realized I didn't answer your question about the battle arena, and I just kind of forgot it. And that's another example, right? It doesn't really matter how far you get in it. Apparently, it's purely for Dio's entertainment, right? He just wants to see what you've got before he agrees to loan you the keystone. And so he's a strange character, for one thing. His interest in you as a battler is strange, but it goes to that same question about, I think it's similar at least, about the what the Ghost Hotel's doing there, right? That's a place of fear as an attraction, and the battle arena, like the Colosseum or whatever, is the place of violence as an attraction, of rage and pain and suffering. And there's something to that, right? For a powerful person, especially, who has sort of gone around the world and gathered all these rare items in his museum, he's seeking different sorts of stimulation at this point, and he wants to see you fight in the battle arena for whatever reason. And weirdly enough, right, the character Cloud is singled out for that. It's like the date in a way. It's kind of like a reverse date, though, right? Because you're battling these random enemies and seeing how far you can get in that respect. And I think I made it through a few rounds, and the way that the battle arena works, right, is that after each round you have some kind of status or equipment effect that comes into play. There's like a slot machine thing going, and you get a random, more or less, effect on your character. And so at a certain point, I think I got my HP halved, like 3 or 4, like to a quarter of what it should have been. And weirdly enough, the enemies at that point were doing a lot less damage, but I still couldn't like heal quickly enough. I think I should have probably used some of my potions and stuff instead of trying to use materia, because I guess, I don't know if it does something like with a percentage. It was really weird. Like, that was really tripping me out, actually, was how little damage they were doing to me, even though I had such little health. But yeah, I got defeated at that point after a few rounds, and so I didn't manage to win whatever accessory the victory in that would give you. I know that later in the game you got to come back and play the battle arena to win points, to get some really, really crucial items, and just like for the challenge of it, of course, side quests and all. But at this point, yeah, it's sort of just for fun. It's a kind of interruption into this, like, super important quest, just to sort of check in and see where you stack up within the professional fighters, I guess, who come and entertain Dio, who's like, his name is God, right? He's above it all. He sort of just observes at this point.
Yeah, he's the king of a golden mushroom tree in a desert. Who's looking for the next big thing. Yeah, he is certainly a figure of the divine. You're right. And it's interesting to think of all the attractions of the Golden Saucer as sort of like what this game is itself, and like trying to activate those Yak Pangsep primary motivational forces. Because like in the Chocobo racing, again, that's striving for dominance, to be the first, to be the fastest, and to gamble too, right? To risk to have that element of risk added to that striving. I mean, it's intoxicating, right? People get addicted to it all the time. One of our favorite authors, Fyodor Dostoevsky, was very much addicted to that sort of thing. And then the game room, the video game room, where you again are like sort of, I know there are the games within Final Fantasy VII, like the ski game and such, but it makes me think of being a kid in an arcade, and the sorts of games that were very popular when we were kids were, I think the most popular ones were like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat at the arcade. Those are functionally like masculinized figures fighting for dominance, going literally up a dominance hierarchy, in order to get to the top. And
Right.
yeah,
And this is something you see, to go to literature here. Do you remember in the Confessions of Augustine when his friend uh,
Alypius.
Alypius, so he's very chaste, and he wants to be good, and his friends are all very rowdy, and they're like, come to the Colosseum with us, watch this show. And Alypius, doesn't want to go, but eventually he goes, and he resolves to just not open his eyes. He's just not going to look at it. But he hears the crowd like roar, and he can't help it. His eyes open, and he sees the combat, and he's just he becomes totally lost to it. And Augustine, he has a similar experience, right, with the very iconic garden where he steals the pear, right, because he knows it's wrong and his friends want to, and that's anyway. So there's something to that, right? I think it was a big part of it as kids. There's something to it being forbidden. It's bad. You're not supposed to play these kinds of games. They're violent. They're crude. The humor, the everything about them. But that's so fun. It's just like you could never do that in real life, but you sort of get that outlet there, which is crucial. Because you have all this energy, and you're just like sitting in school all day and whatever. You have to just like be good. But when you're with your friends and you're playing games, you get to say and do whatever you want, and that's again sort of godlike, right? To be above consequences, or sort of do things which have no real practical consequence, other than, of course, wasting your time and possibly corrupting your soul. I guess it's all in fun. I love the way that Cait Sith here also sort of appeals to your friendship first, right? He's like, let's just be friends. Like, let's pretend this didn't happen. And then obviously you're like, well, that's not okay. You've crossed a boundary. And then he goes ahead and shows you that he has kidnapped Marlene, right? So it's weird. Like, he wants to be your friend, but he's not limited to that as a persuasive gambit. He'll go ahead and just cross that line way over it to get what he wants.
Well, and it's interesting too to what extent the game as pretend then breaks its own rule.
Exactly.
Yeah, because we'll accept a mog with a cat on top of it that uses a horn as a weapon, and that forces itself into our party as if we couldn't stop it at all. But the second that thing kidnaps the fictional daughter of our dialect-speaking man of the earth, Barrett, then he's crossed a line that makes it so that we as the player can no longer, within the frame of reference of Cloud, accept this guy as friend. And yet he's still trying to play pretend that he can be our friend. But there seem to be even rules to pretend games. Or if games are pretend, there are rules that must be followed in order to continue to play the game in the way that you have been playing it.
Right. He also, I find this really strange, I guess, because it seems sort of unnecessary to the plot, right? Like, he could betray you once you're already there, right? Why would it matter? And it seems like a way to sort of quickly and succinctly give you Cait Sith's backstory, because he's kind of been left out. He's just like this extraneous character who appears and does, so it's sort of pointless, right? And to very quickly give him a kind of gravitas, because he's the sort of person who apparently will threaten total innocence, and sort of bring that thematic element back into the story here. And his identity remains a mystery, though, which I found kind of interesting, because I never remember, like, at what point you finally realize who is pulling the strings there. At this point, you can kind of narrow it down, I guess, to somebody within Shinra. But you still don't. He doesn't want you to know at this point who he is. So in a way, he's very much like all the other characters whose stories we've seen played out, where we sort of understand who they are through their history and their backstory.
It's interesting too. He sort of is a figure of the player then too, because he's a step removed from everybody else. He doesn't have as much at stake, not even his real body, just like you. And because of that, he can play the game in a crueler way than he might otherwise do it if he had more skin in the game, as it were. And so he has no problem kidnapping Marlene. And it wasn't Ares's. Sorry, was I on mute there?
No, I heard you. Yeah, you're saying Ares' stepmother or whatever.
Yeah, and what was it? Her as well. I know Ares mentions that, but right. So because Cait Sith and also he sort of adds in that cruel little remark that Shinra's already been to the Temple of the Ancients, or he up where you're going, and he's already given them the keystone, and so it's like you guys are so behind, and then he's like, well, let's get going then. And I sort of didn't understand that comment. It's as if he's like, he is literally a troll, right? And so it's like he's trolling you for being so dumb and for trusting him, and he forced himself on your team, and he's really cruel, and he's got this sort of vague and poorly defined backstory that's not even a real backstory. And then he's sort of unnecessarily sort of snippy with you as well. He's sort of like the figure of the fool in that way, I think, in that he's like, he acts very like sort of saccharine and funny, and like things are good all the time. But then on the other end of it, he's sort of resentful and mean in how he acts, because he doesn't balance those ways of being into sort of a unified personality.
Yeah. I think he does form a kind of parallel for the player there. Yeah, because he's this avatar which is being controlled remotely from somewhere else. He also points out that you are operating without monetary compensation, right? You're doing things altruistically, is his perspective at least. Whereas he is an employee of this huge corporation, right? He's operating as a mercenary. And that's how you started out, Cloud, that is, started out as a mercenary, but seems to have kind of blended his operations with this crew of friends at this point, right? And it seems like that's what Cait Sith really would like, but just can't quite manage it. And so he has to sort of bully and cajole and give you these like very overt directions about where to go next in the game, and why. He's a strange kind of intervention on the part of the developers, but also a kind of parallel for the person playing the game, which is troubling.
The golden saucer itself, and how the golden saucer itself represents the game, like the golden world of the mushroom imagination, the world of Mario, the world of video games, where people go to escape reality or to understand it in a deeper way, depending on how they approach it. And so Cait Sith, you first met in the golden saucer, and now you see him turn on you in the golden saucer. And so in some way, he is like the hybrid chimerical spirit of the golden saucer and of what a video game is. Is it something that is going to give you is it like the two masts on the top of the theater, going to give you the high joys and the low sort of traumas and hits? Is it itself, like you're suggesting, sort of now the more abstract Colosseum? Is it a low pleasure, or is it a high pleasure? Is it vulgar, like you were suggesting, that which, like stealing the pear, has the element of the forbidden in it? I suppose even Dio, as a figure of like a bodybuilder, the large half naked man is sort of a representative of that, or of a primordial man in that way. I'm sorry, I'm just like, getting to the speculative limit on that one.
Yeah, no, I like the way that the game pushes you in that respect, because what's it pushing you towards, right? It's to the temple of the ancients. You are motivated by these weird, sort of base or animal desires like fear and rage, competition, by love or perhaps lust, whatever it might be on the date, or you're sort of like trying to understand your role within the story. And the game is telling you very clearly what you need to do next is go to this place, which is, essentially holy. It's the temple. It's the thing which is so far back in history that you can only connect with it by this kind of miracle, that there's this one person who is an ancient, who has that ability to communicate with the planet, right? And so it's like all these base or low desires and motivations are driving you towards those which are totally transcendent, right?
Yes.
And I think the deeper betrayal is what happens once you get there. Like, this is something so unprecedented that fanboys to this day are weeping over it, right? So
yes.
It's huge. It's colossal.
Yeah, so I like that you noticed that intuitive connection, because I think we made a similar one last time to what preceded the Golden Saucer and then what came after it, because I think it was Nibelheim that came before, or Nibble at that point, right? It was like a time of great seriousness and sadness, but also self-delusion. And now in this case, we have this sort of seemingly superficial place that actually accesses deep primordial emotions, which I suppose one could call primitive, but they're in charge insofar as the hypothalamus is in charge of sending up, food signals and the like when one is hungry. And you get fantasies about that. But then going to the temple of the ancients afterwards, so like going from the most vulgar place to the holiest place as an intuitive jump, setting sort of a range of experiences, suggesting that perhaps this game is like an epic, a mix of both low and high pleasures, a sort of a simulacrum of reality in that respect, that it lets the gamer, like you were suggesting earlier, choose how he or she approaches the game and with what level of seriousness. But it does seem to be the case that when you are going to the Temple of the Ancients, just like when you're going to like the Temple of Light in Zelda, things are getting serious. You now understand that the game is guiding you towards a moment of great gravitas, that maybe even this Golden Saucer was like the eye of the storm. And it will, at some point, serve as the sort of eye of the storm, right? When you do all the chocobo racing, you'll spend some time there if you want to get that golden chocobo and get the ultimate summon, Knights of the Round, especially if you want to defeat the ultimate challenges, the weapons, Ruby and Emerald. And so, yeah. So that's
the way that the fireworks play overhead, and the way that you're the 100th couple, and everything tonight is free, because the tram is broken. I guess they need to kind of keep the customers happy. Like, all these sort of serendipitous things start piling up there in a way that it strikes me that even within the most simple or vulgar or whatever of pleasures and entertainments, you can find these transcendent sorts of moments. It seems like that is also something that the game is hinting at there, and to what extent Cloud realizes that, or to what extent the player realizes that, is sort of beside the point, because you can see it that way. You can, I think, interpret it that way and find some evidence for that, and it really enriches your experience if you can go about your daily life in a way that you see a kind of meaning behind the everyday things. Suddenly, that's a lot more interesting. That's a lot more fun. That's a game that's worth playing all of a sudden, and worth playing the right way.
Well, then it's like surfing, right? Then you're always balancing on the edge of good and evil. No matter what you're doing, you're striving towards excellence, or you're not. And so, whatever sub or mini game you happen to be doing, whatever micro routine or routine you are enacting within the world, are you doing it well? Are you doing it not? In what way is a side quest different from a quest? You're always developing your habits and manifesting yourself within the world, regardless of the frame of reference and the specific activities of a place. You can be behaving as well as possible to get the best result possible in that place. You just plug that framework into where the behavior that you need in a place. And well, some places require skill, right? Like a professional baseball stadium in order to be on the field. But it seems as if the game invites you to do that in the game, or not, if you want to as well. Like, you can make a farce of yourself in the game if you would like to. And in that way, I do think it is a good simulacrum for the world.
Yeah, you don't have to come back and race chocobos and rack up battle points and stuff like that. You can totally proceed without that and have a fine time. But it's there, it's like there's always another challenge. There's always another, especially nowadays with the re-releases and all of the different like speed runs. People play games as fast as possible, get through it. Like, you find different ways to challenge yourself, ways to mix it up and change the game. And that's sort of the I think that's sort of what we're doing here too, in our own way, right? It's like finding a new way to explore and understand this work of art. I find really engaging, really fun. So,
well, and it's like with a wine connoisseur, eventually the pleasure goes from simply sensual at first, and like sort of the Dionysian intoxicating effect of it, to more cerebral, in that you like more sorts of wines, and so you observe the differences between these wines. And so what you appreciate about them are the categorical differences. Like, you observe this and this difference about this, and the difference in this and this effect. So it's not simply sensual, but part of the pleasure will be finding how each of them differ from each other. And so sort of like we've been talking about, the experience itself is not what determines the value of what you get out of the experience. Because if you sort of use it appropriately, or you can take as little from your experiences as you want, right? You can just have the first glass of wine if you want, and that's it. Or you can sort of drink them all and see all the quality, and then see sort of the big picture as well. You can extract massive amounts of information from an experience as you make it more cerebral. And as you start to, like we were talking about with the poem yesterday with Whitman, as you bring your mind to bear on the experience and extract the gold from it, like a gold miner was the image we saw yesterday. And it's like, what makes an experience vulgar or not vulgar is the mind that is extracting the information within it. And that's why, like, say, a Socrates or like an Augustine using a sort of, or a Whitman using sort of like a vulgar meaning common image, like stealing a pear or talking about a gadfly or something, in that you can see the eternal struggle between good and evil, or the eternal need for the intellect to restructure the state. And that within those images is the entire symbolic existence of mankind.
Right. All that in a glass of wine. Go figure.
Yes.
I like it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Because, I mean, those are particles of information that we produce within the world that have an effect, and that there are different ways to enjoy them. You see people do that. And it's like, I think we are now suggesting that a sophisticated way to be literary is to be conscious of the differing modes of artistic representation we have and how they convey the essential stories of the most recent generation, which is not a purely Western generation. This Final Fantasy VII we all played, it's a Japanese game. And there's something to be said for that. There's something to be contended with there. There's a globalism there in the sort of one of the sort of founding stories of our generation. And I think we're trying to pick at that and understand that. And, it's interesting because the Philip K. Dick work, The Man in the High Castle, is coming out, has recently been coming out on Netflix, which explores the notion of what if we had lost World War II and the Japanese and the Germans sort of took over the world after that. And that strikes me as sort of a negative representation of sort of a new globalism. And I know we've talked about sort of a world mythology and what a world mythology might look like, but it is very interesting to wonder to what extent we are already sort of embodying a world mythology. We just need to figure out the representation of it and articulate what it means.
Oh yeah, that's a really, the counterfactual or the alternative history is a fun way, and again something that you can get through art, through games, and through fiction. And I think that's a big part of what draws me to Final Fantasy VII. So we didn't talk about it, but you have the option of going to Wu Tai first. It's a kind of a optional thing totally, and the point at which in the game you do it is also up to you. I think if you wait too long, you can't actually access it though. So at some point we'll have to revisit that, but we're gonna go next time to the Temple of the Ancients, right? So I think that goes pretty deeply into the claims, right, about this game as having something to say mythologically, possibly religiously, temple after all, and certainly the way that the cultures which are creating and experiencing the game affect the message that it conveys. I think all of that, yeah. So I'm really looking forward to this coming episode about the Temple of the Ancients.
And it is interesting to what extent the game just recognizes the architecture of a city, which is a simplified representation of what's important to humans, right? Like we do literally have temples in cities, and cities only have the things essentially that can sustain themselves and thus produce things that we need. And so where is it that you go to have a very important thing happen? Well, where's more important than a temple? What sort of place could you even think of? The idea itself suggests holy. And what is more profound than that which is holy? And that I think is actually literally going to be the lesson that we learn from the materia that we acquire or see there, right? It's almost as if it's suggesting the idea of the holy is the holiest thing that exists. And the idea of the holy is the connection that humans have with each other based on consciousness, which creates the capacity for ultimate trust, which actually makes them literally and figuratively rich. Francis Fukuyama suggests that in his work, Trust, and Dr. Jordan B. Peterson does too. With trust as a commodity in an economy, you can actually make a lot more money because you can make, lots of good loans to people that they then pay back in order to produce more goods and thus more jobs and blah, 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 blah. We don't need an economics lesson. In any case. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is stuff that we definitely want to get into. And I think we should push on that a little bit, because the way that it's portrayed, right, is that the holy thing is fragile and is fallible. It's basically lost, right? It's essentially you're deprived of it there. And what's that about?
I think that ties very strongly to what you said earlier about betrayal, and that is why that is the ultimate story. That will be the ultimate part of this Disc One's sub-narrative, and I think will set the sort of Caesarean force for the remainder of this work. It'll be interesting to consider whether it's more of a Caesarean ultimate betrayal or a Christ-like one, secular or sacred, but trust is necessary in both ways, it seems. And whether it's Lucifer falling or Prometheus stealing from Zeus and thus paying the price with a vulture eating his liver, or for bringing fire or consciousness to man, the capacity to speak to each other and forge connections with each other through words. Sorry, I'm losing my point thinking about Prometheus there, Wes. About betrayal. So it seems as if betrayal is the ultimate story and the first story of mankind too. Cain and Abel, the very first men who were born outside of Eden, Cain betrays Abel by killing him. It seems as if, like what you're saying about trust being so fragile, then of course betrayal would be the ultimate evil for man, because it is so easy to betray someone else's trust, especially if they trust you a lot or have a high standard for you as, say, a friend. And so it's interesting. There's just the story of the Buddha that I think I've shared with you, but I don't know if on this podcast specifically before, seems to say the exact same thing, right? He was on the road between cities once, and the killer ran into him and said, okay, one last request before I kill you. And the Buddha said, okay, go cut that branch off a tree. And the killer goes to do it, brings the branch over to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, okay, well, now reattach it. And the man was enlightened. Again, that strikes me as a story from the East about, well, trust is an easy thing to sort of have at first, but a very hard thing to reclaim after it's been severed or betrayed. And that's like sort of the story of man. And well,
yeah, right on.
Yeah, right on indeed. So it's funny what changes and what doesn't change over time and across space and time. I guess we're going to keep looking for what that happens to be.
Yeah. All right. I think we can play that far. It's kind of a longer thing, but we'll try to get to the end of the Temple of the Ancients for next time then. All right.
All right. Looking forward to it.
All right. Good night.
Good night.